This video is brought to you by Brazil Resources, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol BRI, and on the OTCQX International Market under BRIZF. Brazil Resources just announced an agreement to acquire 100% of the Cachoeira project from Luna Gold Corp. The deal terms imply BRI is paying $18 an ounce for gold in an emerging gold district in northern Brazil, located near BRI's other 3 gold projects. The company is 35% institutionally owned, with 16% of outstanding shares held by the KCR fund, controlled by Doug Casey, Rick Rule, and Marin Katusa. The geological team has earlier discovered more than 10 million ounces of gold directly in Brazil, and is led by successful mining CEO Amir Adnani. To learn more about Brazil Resources, visit BrazilResources.com or call 855-630-1001. Greetings and thank you for joining us at FutureMoneyTrends.com. I'm here with John Rubino. He is the editor-in-chief of DollarCollapse.com. Anybody who's looking for daily news, and you hear the title DollarCollapse.com, and it's a lot more than that. There's a lot of news. There's news about your civil liberties, about Congressman Ron Paul, about alternative energy, alternative technologies, real estate, and of course there is the precious metals and overall macroeconomic news. John, thank you so much for being with us today.
Good to talk to you again, Dan.
John, I want to start off with this recent news. It's about Germany. They want to repatriate their gold. I just want to kind of throw out there is what your thoughts are on, Hugo Chavez wanted 211 tons last year, and he got it in 6 months from London. Germany wants 300 tons, and it looks like they're going to wait 7 years to actually receive that.
Well, this is a potentially big story because you're right. The amount of gold that they want does not take up that much space. It weighs a lot, but that's something that can be shipped in a couple of dozen trucks, or one big tanker ship could take it across the Atlantic Ocean with no trouble. So there's something else going on here, and there are 2 possibilities that come to mind. And one is that the Bundesbank really doesn't feel like it needs its gold back, or it has cut deals that prohibit it from taking its gold back. But it wants to get everyone off its back. So it makes an announcement that says, hey, we're getting our gold back, and then small print, in 7 years. And so the hope is that people will see the headline and then stop paying attention, and then things can go back to normal. The other possibility, which I think is far more interesting from a gold bug's point of view, is that the gold's not there anymore. That over the years, the U.S. has leased out so much of its gold by giving gold to a bullion bank like J.P. Morgan Chase, who then sells it in the open market to depress the price of gold. That there really isn't that much left, and that they don't want to be handing what they have out back to anybody else. And so that it's not really feasible for Germany to get its gold back in the short run. And that opens up all kinds of interesting possibilities, because if a huge amount of central bank gold has been leased into the marketplace, in effect, that means there's a huge short position out there in gold, in the sense that the bullion banks at some point have to buy back the gold that they've dumped into the market in order to give it back to the central banks according to the lease contract. And that means that there's a lot of buying pressure out there prospectively that might happen in a hurry if we get a short squeeze. Frequently, when there's huge short positions, one of the shorts will panic, try to close out their position in a hurry, and that'll cause the other shorts to panic and close out their positions at any price, which spikes the asset in question, causes it to go parabolic. And the idea that something like that out there is waiting to happen for gold is pretty exciting. Yeah. It's bad for the world in general, because a world with $5,000 gold is a very unstable world. But it's great for people who have seen this coming and who've been accumulating precious metals, like you.
Yeah, now you kind of answered it in just now with as far as Germany. Maybe this is just for the headlines and to give people peace of mind. But this is interesting, wouldn't you say, that it's a Western central bank? Because there's always kind of been, those Western central banks, they're kind of in charge of manipulating and suppressing the gold price, and the Eastern central banks have been buying gold. This is interesting, though, that there seems to be a divide on the Atlantic, wouldn't you say?
Oh, it really does, and that's also interesting. Why Germany has decided to do this? If they're in on the game, then they're risking exposure of the game by doing this. And so it's not clear why it's happening. It could be that not everybody within the power structure in Germany is in on the game or willing to play anymore, and it could be that the public pressure has become intense enough to get them to do something. And I really don't know. But the fact that it's happening is one more piece of the puzzle of the system breaking down at some point, because you're seeing the tools of manipulation one by one cease to work. Fiscal policy used to be a lot more effective than it is. In other words, you could borrow a lot of money if you were a government, and you could use it to smooth out the pathologies that come from your other bad behavior. And you could print huge amounts of new currency in order to maintain the debt that you were taking on. Well, those strategies are starting to break down now as we accumulate more and more debt. And so the gold leasing into the market in order to depress the price of gold, which makes paper currencies look stronger than they really are, is something else that may be hard to pull off going forward. And so as you get these strategies for fooling us breaking down, the truth becomes closer and closer to being visible to more and more people. And at some point, you get the system spinning out of control because nobody trusts the guys in charge anymore. And that day is coming. There's no way to know when it comes, but it sure does feel like more and more of the scams that the powers that be have been running are starting to come to light.
Now, with people, food stamps, 48 million people, you've got pretty high energy prices, considering people are kind of in almost a recessionary. At least people feel like they're in a recession, if not a depression. Unemployment long-term unemployment numbers at a record right now. Do you think we can just grind, or Bernanke can just manage to grind this out for 20 years, kind of like Japan? And do you think that's actually their plan? Is their plan just to do a soft crash landing?
Oh, their plan is to get through the next week. They don't have any plan beyond that. They've reached the point where their old ideas, their old philosophy no longer works, because their old philosophy depended on taking on more and more debt each year. And they're seeing an end to that. And they really don't have anything to replace it with. So our guys should not be thought of as these super geniuses who are managing the system according to some arcane theory. There's nothing like that going on. They're just trying to get through the next week and then the next election. But the Japan situation is kind of interesting, because they have been able to take on more and more debt year after year after year, to the point that they owe a lot more at the sovereign debt level than the U.S. does as a portion of the economy. But they were kind of a unique situation, because they had an extremely high savings rate domestically, and they ran a trade surplus. So they had a lot of money coming in. And their people were willing to use that money to buy government bonds at extremely low rates, and that allowed them to finance gargantuan budget deficits for years and years. But those two things are ending now. Their trade balance is turning negative, which means they don't have a lot of money flowing in from outside in order to finance their deficits, and their people are starting to retire. They're a very old population, and retirees are starting to outnumber kids in the country, and retirees tend not to save, they tend to spend. So you don't have that big pool of savings anymore to soak up their government debt. And there's a hedge fund manager named Kyle Bass who's been making a really compelling case that Japan is nearing the end of their debt accumulation process, and that soon they're going to have to start borrowing externally instead of financing themselves internally, which means they're going to have to pay interest rates that are comparable to what the U.S. and Europe pays, which means 2 or 3% for long-term bonds. And right now they pay much less than that. So if they have to pay 2 or 3% and refinance all their existing debt at that rate, their interest cost will exceed government tax revenues, which means they're dead meat. They're totally toast at that point, because they won't have any money left over to spend on anything else. And so the yen will go into a death spiral, and their bond yields will spike, and you'll see the system just crater.
Yeah, I think
And
John Malden, I saw it on dollarclaps.com, the year of the windshield. He was saying Japan was a bug in search of a windshield, and he thinks this year they're going to find it.
yeah, and you can never call the timing of something like this because things tend to go on, especially when somebody's armed with a printing press. The bubbles tend to go on a lot longer than you expect if you're just applying rational analysis to the process. So it's possible Japan holds on for a bit longer, but the numbers are really turning against them. And so the question then becomes, when does the market recognize this reality and act on it? And there's no way to know when markets will do this, when everybody heads for the exit. But the numbers are so compellingly bad that at some point it's going to happen. And it could easily be 2013. Could be 2015, but it could be a lot sooner than that. And when it does, Japan will have the mother of all bond crises and the mother of all currency crises. And they're a big enough economy that they could easily pull down the rest of the developed world's financial system when they go. And alternatively, they could go and they could scare everyone else into heading for the exits, and in that way pull down the rest of the global financial system. So it could happen directly, or it could happen via Japan's effect on the confidence of the rest of the system. And either way, it's bad news for us, because once people start looking honestly at our numbers and start demanding correct accounting methods from our government, then it'll be clear that we're functionally bankrupt too. And forget about Europe. That they've survived as long as they have in the current form in the Eurozone is really shocking. So we've created a complex global financial system that is prone to catastrophic failure. And the only question is, when does it fail catastrophically? And there's no way to know that, because it'll more than likely be something that isn't immediately predicted that sets it off. So many big events in history have happened because something that nobody expected happened, and then that had a chain reaction effect. And so it's impossible to predict what the catalyst will be, but you can say with certainty that we've created the conditions in which some catalyst is going to come along and set off this huge, raging financial fire that consumes a good part of the developed world.
When this happens, John, a lot of people, the first thing they do is, okay, we buy some physical gold and silver, maybe some storage companies like Gold Money have some gold offshore. And, you pay off your debt, you prepare for hard times, you do everything you can do. And then at that point, you kind of want to still make some investments. You want to better your life and possibly your children's lives. Let's just first, before we talk about investments, let's just touch on the stock market and through your research. If there's a bond crisis and a currency crisis, does that necessarily mean there's a stock crisis?
Probably, because confidence exists across the board for investors. If your bond portfolio just gets crushed, then you're going to be less likely to take risks in stocks. Although, this is a tough one, because bonds are clearly a horrendous place to put your money, and the stocks of certain companies are less horrendous. So I think that buying the broad indexes in the U.S. would not be a good way to play the coming crisis, but certain sectors might do well. For instance, if we have a bond crisis and a dollar crisis, and the dollar goes down in value, that's good for our exporting companies. So you can buy some of our big multinationals and maybe make out. And you could buy the precious metals mining companies, because if gold and silver go through the roof because the dollar is falling, then the gold in the ground that is owned by these mining companies will become a lot more valuable, and so will their stocks. Real estate is trickier in this situation, because you got a lot of REITs out there, as you mentioned before we started, that have really nice yield. And it's conceivable that real estate as a hard asset goes up in dollar terms when the dollar goes down, and that in that way they'll be able to maintain their dividends or increase their dividends, and so they'll be decent investments. But this gets very tricky when things start to spin out of control, because it gets harder and harder to predict with certainty what happens in any given sector, because you've got chaos out there. And so I think precious metals bullion would be the most restful place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then farmland would probably be the second most restful, because we're always going to have to eat. Doesn't matter what the currency markets are doing or what the bond market's doing, is we will tend to eat the same amount each day if we can. And we'll tend to cut back on other things before we starve our kids. So you'll see the value of good quality farmland hold up. And so it works its way down from the hardest assets to the most paper-based assets.
Mm-hmm.
And as you go down, things get less and less attractive till you're out at the long-term government bond level, which is the worst place in the world to be in this kind of a scenario. So if you're structuring a portfolio, you want to stay on the hard asset side of the spectrum as much as possible. And then if you're really aggressive, you want to short things, because there will be some phenomenal shorting possibilities out there. In other words, betting against a given asset and hoping it goes down in price. So the people who short the long-term treasury bond market at some point are going to make a fortune, but that's been something that looked interesting for 4 or 5 years and has been a losing bet all of that time. And at some point it's going to be a huge winner. But again, timing is tough, so that's not something you want to speculate on. That's something you want to probably give up the first 10 or 20% move to be sure that it's actually happening, and then jump in.
Yeah, in closing, I want to talk to you just about the police state. A lot of people are rushing out to buy guns right now, and I've spoken to a few libertarians, and I know you're friends with them as well, as people who've moved out of the country, like Jeff Berwick, Doug Casey, and I don't even want to mention the other guy's name. I think you know who I'm talking about. He's our Bitcoin friend, but he's so low key. I'm not going to mention his name. But what are your thoughts on the police state in the U.S.? Is it going to get a lot worse? I mean, is this just a trend that we're just? I mean, it's kind of rough, especially if you have kids. It's like I'm willing to take a lot of shit from the government, John, to say I don't know another way to put it, because I don't want to be separated from my children. I'm not going to go against them. Is this a trend that the government's just going to continue to take advantage of, that, look, we like our lives, so you know what? They're going to keep taking inches and inches every year?
Yeah, well, we're clearly creating the conditions in which a police state could be born. I mean, thanks to the Patriot Act and the recent National Defense Authorization Act, the government can arrest us without warrant and hold us indefinitely, and they can monitor all of our electronic conversations. Now, they could be listening in on you and me right now without a warrant, which is blatantly unconstitutional, but for some reason we're able to do that now. And they've got really draconian controls on foreign investment now that no other country in the world imposes on its citizens, but the U.S. imposes those controls on us. So basically, the Bill of Rights is being shredded already. We haven't even descended into chaos yet, and we've got various aspects of the police state being set up. Oh, yeah, and we're importing military drones all over the country for use by local police forces. So we're militarizing our police force. So yeah, this is all scary stuff. And on the social policy side, we've now, thanks to the new healthcare bill, we've given the government the right to force us to buy stuff, which it never had the right to do before. Yeah. So now they can theoretically force us to use our retirement funds to buy treasury bonds, or other things equally as scary as that. And so, yeah, we're definitely creating the conditions in which a future dictator can just flip a switch and be a dictator, turn from a constitutional elected president into somebody who has basically absolute power over.
Well, you had a great article on that. I think it was turnkey. What was it? Turnkey totalitarianism.
Yeah, something like that.
You wrote that, I think, about 6 months ago.
Because the guys in charge right now would be dictators. They might be honest, good people who are just trying to solve our problems without having very good tools with which to do it. But this is a country that has elected a lot of questionable people. And so the reason that you limit the power of government is because even if there are good guys in charge today, there probably won't be good guys in charge later, because the greater the government's power, the more it tends to attract people who want that power. And those tend not to be good people, or it corrupts the people that are in power because they're able to do things that you can't do in normal life. And so eventually you end up with a dictatorship if you allow the government to have the power to impose something like that. Well, that was the point of the Constitution, to limit the power of government. So we didn't reach this point, but we've basically shredded the Constitution now. The government has unlimited powers to do pretty much anything it wants to in the realms of economics and the military and the police state that we're setting up. So yeah, I'm worried. I'm a father of two sons. Got a 15-year-old and 19-year-old, and I'm very worried that we're going to embark on the next big war out there to try to protect the global military empire that we've built up, and that we're going to institute a draft. We're going to just start picking up 19, 20-year-olds and saying, okay, from now on, you're going to spend your life fighting in Iran or fighting in the China Sea, trying to protect Taiwan from mainland China, or some other crazy thing like that. And so I get the impulse to have some property overseas. So if you have to bug out, that you're able to do it. And you see a lot of people out there doing things like that. They're setting up what they call gulches after John Galtz from Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. And that's only going to increase as time goes on. And there's also the idea of the American redoubts, which is Wyoming and parts of Idaho and Montana, where a lot of people are moving to as the last potentially free, potentially defensible part of the U.S., where they're setting up small towns and compounds and basically just trying to hunker down and weather the storm. And I hate that we have to talk about this because it didn't have to happen, but it definitely is happening, and we should all be aware of it.
Yeah, very scary times indeed. John, thank you so much for your time. If anyone would like to learn more about John, please check out his site, dollarclaps.com, where you can subscribe for free. Sends about 1 to 2 emails a week, I believe, and you'll get his analysis and thoughts, as well as checking the site daily for daily updates. John, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dan.